Hi, Misha here, and continuing to cover the fighters of the Japanese Army. We looked at the Ki-44 Oscar, also in the past the Ki-27 Nate. Now it's time to look at a bit of a different plane, but still from Nakajima, the Ki-44. The Japanese name for this was the Army Type 2 fighter with the name of Demon, and the Allies gave it the reporting name of Tojo. And this is a bit of a different animal. The Oscar was designed with maneuverability, with turning in mind. Well, the Ki-44 was designed as more of an interceptor with speed in mind. I know, a crazy notion, right? The directive to construct a high-performance interceptor came down in 1939, and Nakajima got to work as quick as they could in 1940. Actually first flying the prototype that August. But it would take a little time to get these in to production because they did have some issues. The Army wanted a plane able to reach 370 miles per hour, so quite a bit faster than the 310 required for the Oscar. They also wanted it to be able to get up to altitude, about 15,000 feet, in 5 minutes. And so they had their work cut out for them. In the end, Nakajima ended up using an engine really designed for a bomber. Still a radial engine, but very large. And they ended up giving it a pretty short wingspan. It's about as long as an Oscar at 29 feet, but it only has a wingspan of about 31 feet. Well, this would eventually go into production in 1941. The original prototypes would feature two 7.7mm machine guns and two 12.7mm machine guns, but the production models would have four 12.7mm machine guns, two in the wings, two in the fuselage. It could also carry two drop tanks for extended range. Later in its production, they would upgrade the engine, and they would be able to get these up to about 376 miles per hour maximum speed. And they would have a timed altitude of under 4.5 minutes. So they achieved their goals. The problem was it had a very high landing speed, at least compared to other Army fighters, and it had a heavy wing loading. So it was considered a rather difficult plane to fly, so much so that they only initially put their most seasoned pilots in these. And this really was a specialist aircraft. It was first delivered to an experimental squadron at the end of 1941 and was used in early 1942 in places like Indochina and then over China, Burma, the Philippines, and whatnot. And from the beginning, it was mostly done to intercept Allied aircraft, particularly bombers. But it really would have a pretty brief career. It was already out of production by 1944, and much like the Ki-43, it would be replaced by the Ki-84, so-called Frank, by war's end. Only 3 squads would still be flying Ki-44s in 1945. and it had a bit of a mixed reputation. On the one hand, it was considered reliable, dependable, but on the other, it was just considered a hard plane to fly, at least compared to what many of the pilots in the Army Air Force were used to. And of course, 4 .50 caliber machine guns was pretty good, but when these started going up against truly high performance bombers like the B-29, they were of limited use. Now, they did experiment with putting 2 .40 caliber cannon on these, but the cannon proved to be less than ideal. They had a slow rate of fire, the shells had a relatively slow velocity, and therefore, consequently, they had a short range, meaning they had to really get up close and personal, and that was getting difficult for them to do. So in the end, they only manufactured a little over 1,200 of these, and most were retired out of service pretty quickly. And obviously they were used where applicable. They were, for example, used in the home islands. They were stationed in airfields near industrial cities, factories, as kind of point interceptors to fly up and go after American B-25s, B-29s, and etc. But more of a defensive fighter, more of a specialist interceptor, but an interesting plane. And at least it did show the Army Air Force could bend a bit on its love of maneuverability, and it would pave the way for some later fighters, showing that sometimes speed was a good thing. The model is from De Agostini. Just in. These are basically built on the old IXO tooling with a few updates. So you get spinning propellers, you get gears up or down, you get a basic cockpit, you get antennae, you get a stand. They're actually quite neat for the low cost of around $25. And again, these just started to come into the country. And are a neat little piece of Japanese World War II history. I guess it's worth pointing out that one complaint pilots had for these is the big bomber engine they put in them, the big cowling, made visibility less than ideal, especially on the ground while taxiing. These did have a retractable landing gear in the rear. Of course, the front was, but the rear wheel could retract, which wasn't always found on World War II fighters. But anything they could do to get that better speed, better climb, they were all for. But definitely one of the lesser known fighters, and very clearly a Nakajima design, very clearly related to the Oscar. So I thought I'd share it with you, just for fun. Feel free to comment below, and as always, if you could, like, share, and subscribe. With that, this is Misha, and I'll be back soon with more Japanese planes. I'll catch you then.